Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with Dr. Cindy Nye on loving our children through adoption. At any point in this presentation, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We will hold all questions until the end of the presentation, and we will do a Q&A with Dr. Nye at the very end. To get us kicked off, I am going to go ahead and have Dr. Nye introduce herself, and we will get this party started.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm a clinical psychologist. I actually did my training at Michigan State in the clinical psychology program, child and family track. And I now live in Connecticut and am in practice here. I debated whether or not to talk about my family as it pertains, obviously, to this topic. It pertains very strongly. My only hesitation was that it's a little complicated to explain, but I will do my best. I'm a mother of 5. All of the children came to me through the foster care system in Michigan, starting with 3 children all at once, an 18-month-old, a 6-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And then those 3 were with us in our home for 2 years before the 6-year-old and 10-year-old went back to their birth mother. They all had the same birth mother, but the youngest stayed with us for another year, and we weren't sure whether or not he was going to go back. We subsequently were able to adopt him, and then 1 year later, we had told the agency we'd love to take in a baby, and we were offered a teenager. We thought they must have misheard our request, but we took in a 16-year-old, and then 2 weeks later, a baby came along. So suddenly we had a teenager and a newborn, and everyone kept asking, how has it been having the newborn? And I said, the newborn is fine, but this teenager, oh my goodness. Interestingly enough, the brother and the sister that had left our home after 2 years, the sister got back in touch with us as a teenager when she had petitioned the court to not live with the birth parents anymore and was staying with a family in another town where she was living. And then my son, who had lost his brother and sister after those 2 years, understandably was quite distraught about losing his siblings, and even more so when his sister came back, wondered where his brother was and why we couldn't see him. So I promised him that once his brother turned 18, I would do my best to contact him and find him. But out of respect for the birth parents, I felt like I needed to wait until he was 18. And I tracked him down. We went out to Michigan to visit with him. He came to spend a summer with us, and he ended up moving with us and has been a wonderful. It's been a wonderful reunion and having him back in our family. So, yeah. So that's kind of what I bring to this as a mom, and we'll take it from here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all of you. So as you saw in the description, my hope today is to kind of cover some common concerns that adoptees might have across childhood and adolescence specifically, some things these children commonly wish that their adoptive parents would know, and ways we can support them through the issues and challenges that they face. I'm hoping that as part of this, you can learn the concerns that these children might have at various developmental stages and milestones, how they view being adopted, and some strategies for supporting them through some of these challenges. So Sharon Kaplan, Rosia, and Deborah Silverstein identified 7 core issues that are common in adoption and permanency. And they describe these as not only being relevant for the adopted child, but also for the whole constellation of people in that child's life or connected to that child. That would include the birth or first parents, as well as the adoptive parents and any other siblings and family members. But for the purposes of today, I'm going to just focus on how these tie in with the adopted child themselves. So those 7 core issues are loss, rejection, shame and guilt, grief, identity, intimacy, and mastery and control. So starting with loss is really what begins the child's journey in life. An adoption occurs because of a crisis or trauma that leads to the displacement of children from their birth families. It could be an unplanned pregnancy, rape, incest, poverty, addiction, divorce, mental illness, war, natural disasters, epidemics, and cultural biases. All of these could be precipitating factors to a child no longer living with the birth parents. And this loss can lead to a sense of rejection, a loss of social acceptance, a loss of group inclusion, or a sense of belonging. It can cause a deep sense of abandonment and isolation, feeling unworthy, and a fear of future rejection and abandonment. It also can create an increased sensitivity to any further rejection, no matter how large or small, actual or imagined. Because of that initial sense of rejection, whenever we experience anything painful, whether it's physical or emotional, our brain is wired to remember that and do everything it can in its power to detect the possibility of that pain happening again. So that comes in very handy for things like us learning not to touch a hot stove. But unfortunately, with more complex things like relationships, it can also cause children who've experienced this kind of loss and rejection to overgeneralize and see rejection even in areas where it might not be happening. Subsequent losses can also be experienced as a rejection. And we'll talk a little bit more later about what kinds of losses that might include. It's important to know that children often blame themselves due to their egocentric thinking, and this makes them believe that they can change or act differently in the future to avoid future rejection. So in other words, if it was their fault that it happened to begin with, then by extension, they might be able to prevent it in the future. So they might ask, why me? What did I do or not do to deserve this? They might feel judged, unwanted, less than, or not good enough. And it's important to note that rejection is often felt in the body as discomfort and pain. Rejection often leads to feelings of shame or guilt, which affects self-esteem and self-worth and can create anxiety. So shame relates to oneself, a view of oneself. It's the painful feeling of being bad and undeserving of deep connections and happiness. So the child's thought is, I'm bad. Guilt is in relation to others. It's a feeling of responsibility or remorse for some wrongdoing or offense, whether real or imagined. So I did something bad. Shame is maladaptive, while guilt is generally considered to be adaptive, but I would qualify that because guilt can be maladaptive or unhealthy for us when we're blaming ourselves for things that we actually didn't do wrong, but are the actions of someone else. And both of these can discourage our adopted kids from thinking of themselves in a constructive or positive way. I just need to move my little taskbar here. And it can limit them being loving toward us and receiving love because they don't feel worthy. When shame is intensely experienced from infancy through the formative years, there develops an inner critic in the mind, which creates a negative or harsh view of the self and also caretakers and the world. So you can see how this greatly affects self-esteem. It leaves a person believing that their core self is less worthy than other people. And these beliefs can increase anxiety and may lead to defensive behaviors. Guilt is a learned social emotion that develops from our early parent-child attachment experiences. So a consistent, secure, healthy primary attachment relationship allows children to experience and internalize their parents' values and beliefs, and that's kind of how a conscience develops. The conscience allows guilt to be felt and develops as children internalize their parents' voices, actions, and images, which they subsequently carry within them for the rest of their lives. I'm going to go out on a limb here and speculate that all of you at one point have probably found yourself almost hearing your mother say something in your head that she would have said when you were a kid, relative to your behavior or the consequences of your actions. So caregivers can affect whether what a child learns is that they did something bad or wrong, which is guilt, versus that they are bad, which again ties in with shame. The profound losses that led to the feelings and fears of rejection, and then the shame and guilt, must be grieved. Adoption and permanency losses are often not named, acknowledged, or grieved. If you think about it, adoption is often seen as, wow, well, what a great solution. It benefits everybody. The child needs a family. The birth parents couldn't parent and adequately care for that child for whatever reason. And these new parents now have a child that they can love. So because of this, it might be difficult as parents to recognize, accept, discuss, and allow the child to express emotions connected to grief. I know we were guilty of having adoption parties for our children, and I now recognize that while it was a big reason for us to celebrate, that for them there might have been mixed feelings, at least related to that. So acknowledging the loss and making room for the work of grief is essential to any healing process. Children are usually not taught how to cope with loss, and often that's because adults themselves don't know how to grieve, and children likely don't even recognize their grief as grief. I also want to point out, we often say children are resilient, and I don't think they're as resilient as we would like to believe. Just because they're not crying every day and they're able to get up and go to school and do their homework and play with friends does not mean that they haven't been significantly emotionally affected by the experiences that they've gone through. And I think as adults, we're too quick to assume that they're all put back together and everything is okay, which unfortunately means that we're not facilitating opportunities for them to share if they're having tough feelings. And grieving is important because it allows people to speak their truth, express their feelings, and receive compassion and support from others. In terms of identity, we're all on a quest to understand who we are, where we fit in, and to share our stories with others. And that helps us better understand ourselves. But stories that are broken through adoption can make it difficult for a child to understand and express who they are and to kind of solidify their life's narrative. Identity formation begins in childhood and intensifies during adolescence. And gaps in identity for our adopted kids may be more pronounced when they start school or there's some kind of family-oriented classroom assignment, like a family tree. I remember when my the two sons that we ended up adopting had the family heritage day at school, and you know, they didn't have any idea who what their family origins were, so they chose studying Ireland, but that wasn't something that was naturally a part of their own family and ancestral history. So adoptees may feel that their identity is incomplete, as if they're missing some pieces to their puzzle. And there's so many pieces of information that they don't have access to. And that may generate a lot of questions that feel important to their identity. Why were they put up for adoption? What became of their birth parents or their first parents? What are those parents like? Are there any siblings? Do they resemble anyone in that first family? And again, as a parent, in many cases, the parents don't have answers to those questions. So parents can't necessarily be a resource for the child. All we can do is validate the importance of these questions to them and give them the space to ask them and honor their need to ponder and to wonder about these things. Intimacy requires a person to know who they are and what they need in relationships and to believe that they have value. Our most primary motivation is the drive to belong and learn how to get emotional needs met through human connections. And it's our intimate attachments that provide the network through which our social, emotional, physical, and psychological needs get met. Intimate attachments attachment relationships require trust, respect, acceptance, empathy, and reciprocity. and identity and intimacy are linked. So as a person clarifies and reclarifies who they are, their ability to relate to others, forgive others, embrace others, and trust others is enhanced. So you can see why, if those earlier core issues have not been addressed, our adoptees may not know themselves well enough to know what they really need or what they have to offer another person in an emotionally intimate relationship. Mastery and control are the last 2 points in this paradigm. So if you think about all of those unidentified, unnamed, unacknowledged, and ungrieved losses, those can create intense feelings of powerlessness and loss of control. The infant or child had no input into the decision that changed their life trajectory, and that early loss of control that moved them from one family tree to another resulted in the ultimate loss of power and control. And as part of that haphazard nature of how they join their particular family, they may wonder, how did I end up in this family? A sense of control helps us feel secure, and so does feeling powerful. Power is a strong component of resilience. It gives us the ability to have an effect on others, to feel we have authority and rights, to be hopeful, and to create changes that we might want for ourselves. And so with children, controlling behavior and power struggles might represent an effort to feel more powerful and to feel less vulnerable. And the desire for power and control over one's life unfolds through each stage of development and throughout adulthood. So I'm going to go through these quickly, but as I read them, I'd like you to think about how those 7 different aspects kind of play out in these different points. This is based on a book by Sherry Eldridge called 20 Things Adopted Children Wish Their Parents Knew. Number 1, I suffered a profound loss before I was adopted. You are not responsible. Number 2, I need to be taught that I have special needs arising from adoption loss, of which I need not be ashamed. Number 3, if I don't grieve my loss, my ability to receive love from you and others will be hindered. That's that intimacy piece. Number 4, my unresolved grief may surface as anger towards you. Number 5, I need your help in grieving my loss. Teach me how to get in touch with my feelings about my adoption and then validate them. Number 6, just because I don't talk about my birth family doesn't mean I don't think about them. Number 7, I want to take the initiative in opening conversations about my birth family. Number 8, I need to know the truth about my conception, birth, family history, no matter how painful the details may be. Number 9, I am afraid that I was given away by my birth mother because I was bad. I need you to help me dump my toxic shame. Number 10, I am afraid you will abandon me. Number 11, I must appear more whole than I actually am. I need your help to uncover the parts of myself that I keep hidden so I can integrate all the elements of my identity. Number 12, I need to gain a sense of personal power. Number 13, please don't say I look or act just like you. I need to acknowledge and celebrate our differences. Number 14, let me be my own person, but don't let me cut myself off from you. Number 15, please respect my privacy regarding my adoption. Don't tell other people without my consent. 16, birthdays may be difficult for me. 17, not knowing my full medical history can be distressing at times. 18, I'm afraid I will be too much for you to handle. 19, when I act out my fears in obnoxious ways, please hang in there with me and respond wisely. And number 20, even if I decide to search for my birth family, I will always want you to be my parents. And that can be a tough one for adoptive parents. I think, we hope that we open our home and open our arms and hearts to this child, that what we have to provide will be enough. And with that, I think is a expectation sometimes that they wouldn't have a need to know their birth family. And I think it's important to recognize that it's not about what we have provided them that makes them want to search out the birth family. It's again more that wanting more pieces of the puzzle and feeling like something is missing by not knowing. As the adopted person matures, the need for information about the birth family grows, and in external life events and internal processes can trigger the desire for additional knowledge or bring to the surface the need to know one's roots. So I'm just going to cover some key times at which an adopted person may need more information or have increased questions about birth heritage. And there will be some overlap here with those 20 wishes that I just went over. For preschool children, when children become aware of a pregnant woman and what that means, they may have questions about their own birth, and that will initially, they will initially probably connect with the adoptive parents and assume that the adoptive mother was pregnant with them. When they enter school, that will really be the first time that they might have to deal with questions about being adopted outside of their family and by themselves. In other words, there's not a parent there to kind of run interference for them. This might cause them to feel different from peers. They might face unexpected questions. This will expose them to others' views about adoption. They will start to realize how babies are made, and that will get them thinking again more about birth and pregnancy and how that ties in with their own beginnings. And then a growing recognition that there are two people who are not the adoptive parents that made them but chose not to keep them. And they might find themselves wishing that they had been born to the adoptive parents, wishing that the adoptive mother, for example, had been pregnant with them. In adolescence, abstract thinking allows for a more thorough and complex processing of the whys of adoption. So a teenager might wonder what might have been and entertain fantasies, both positive and negative, about the birth parents. As they enter romantic relationships and have feelings of sexual attraction, that might also cause them to think more or speculate about the birth parents' relationship. If they're angry, in particular, they might use their adoptive status to manipulate their parents or even hurt their feelings, particularly if they sense that the adoptive parents are a little bit insecure about their status or feel threatened by the birth parents. Conversely, the teenager might want to make sure they don't hurt their adoptive parents, and so they might want information but worry about hurting their parents' feelings by asking for it. And as they enter adulthood, they may feel like this is the first time they have a right to information about the birth family. And they might feel more comfortable seeking that out directly rather than involving the adoptive parents. Again, probably out of a desire to not hurt them or desire to protect them. And they might feel increased insecurity about transitioning to independence because moving out of one's home is a loss. And there's a whole nother level or layer of that for children who are adopted. Birthdays, those are a natural day to kind of connect with the birth mother psychologically. The young person might wonder if the birth mother is thinking about them too, and they might also have thoughts about the birth father. Losses of all kinds can really stir up questions and more feelings about being adopted. Deaths, divorce, moves, rejection by a peer, losing possessions. Really, any loss can potentially trigger the original loss of the birth parents once the child is aware of their existence. My son Lance, he was the one who came when he was 18 months old, and possessions were really a big deal to him. So if he'd never wanted to get rid of anything, and if he lost something, that would really be challenging for him. But he didn't just keep that to himself and his own possessions. I remember one time we were at the Great Wolf Lodge and we were going up in an elevator back to our room, and another boy got on. He had some kind of a squishy toy that he had just purchased with his tokens in the game room. And as the elevator doors closed, the boy put that squishy toy in there and the doors shut on the toy and the elevator went up and we all watched as the toy disappeared below us. That little boy whose toy it was maybe had 5 seconds of disappointment, but seemed to mostly shrug it off. My son was devastated for the whole rest of the day about what happened to that boy's toy and how upset and sad he might feel. Other triggers, TV programs, movies or books about loss, units of study in school. When the same son was in upper elementary school, they did a role play related to the Holocaust, and my son was playing the role of the father and had his children taken away from him and put on a different train to a different concentration camp. Now, personally, I feel like that would be challenging for any child, but it really tore him up because it really replicated emotionally for him that experience, that horrific loss of being separated of children being separated from their parents. Medical issues and appointments, because adoptees rarely have as much medical history as a not adopted person. And so they have really no access in general to medical information and certainly no updated medical information. So this might cause them to feel disconnected, have heightened anxiety, and maybe anger at the lack of medical history. And those routine questions that we have to answer every time, filling out in paperwork and talking to the doctor about, those can always be those painful reminders about not having that information. So now I want to talk about some implications of this for parenting. I see parenting as having kind of 3 basic elements. There's the caregiving aspect, attending to physical and emotional needs. There's the connection aspect, establishing and maintaining closeness and attachment. And then what I call correction, which traditionally is probably called discipline, which would be providing instruction and structure. For all children, but especially those who are adopted and or have experienced trauma, all 3 of these aspects of parenting need to include compassion and consistency. Compassion and empathy help children feel loved. It can help reduce shame. It facilitates positive self-esteem. It enables them to feel valued, respected, and understood. It facilitates them learning to handle and regulate their own emotions. And consistency helps children feel safe. It helps them know what to expect so they don't have to wonder. It minimizes confusion and anxiety, and it makes home life feel predictable and stable. If we look at what I call compassionate connection, one of the best things we can do for our children in any situation is to provide them with clear choices, making sure that whichever choice they go with is acceptable to you. And if there is a need for a consequence, it's really important for it to be logical and not arbitrary. As an example, if a child is playing with crayons and writes all over the wall with them, then it might the natural consequence might be, for a little while when we use these crayons, you're going to have to do it when I'm here with you, versus you've just lost TV for tonight. The goal is not to make them suffer. This is not the days when our parents claim that this is going to hurt them more than it hurts us. It's to make them learn or to help them learn. Also, not every behavior warrants a consequence, because no matter how the consequence is delivered, there is still that risk of the child internalizing shame and I'm bad experience. And we can't completely prevent that, because it has to do with how the child views him or herself, but we certainly don't want to inadvertently contribute to it. And choices and consequences are not commands and punishment. It's very important that's where bringing in the compassionate and the connection piece is so important. So, and even responding with compassion if the child becomes upset about the choice or the consequence. When we think about reparative parenting, one thing to look at is attachment. Trying to make sure that how we intervene and how we interact facilitates connection versus distancing. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I like to call it using leverage instead of leverage. Our relationship with them can be the most powerful thing that motivates them to make good choices. Sometimes discipline approaches make it about the privilege or the goodie that they earn or the thing that gets taken away, which I think of as leverage. But the highest level of moral reasoning is where we do the right thing because it's the right thing, because we care about how other people feel, not because we don't want to get in trouble. So using our relationship and our connection with them to help is a motivator for them to make better choices. Avoiding making threats is part of that as well, and amplifying the positive. I used to love when I would hear my boys playing nicely in the other room, and I would sneak around the corner and say, "Caught you being good," and they would both go, "Oh man." And it was just a wonderful way for them to feel like and to be noticed for, engaging in positive behavior. Because oftentimes kids more often get noticed when they're doing something that a parent doesn't want them to do. I encourage parents to think about the best boss that they've ever had and the worst boss that they've ever had. The worst boss is probably the one that, oh boy, you just dread hearing from them, because when you hear from them, it's not going to be good. They're going to scold you about something. They're going to pile more work on you. They're going to question something that you did. That's the kind of boss where you're just like watching the clock and you can't wait to get out of there and get the day over with. Best boss is the one that goes out of the way to notice you and acknowledge you for the work that you're doing and express appreciation for that. You look forward to running into that boss in the hallway. When the phone rings or you get an email from them, you have a positive curiosity about why they're contacting you. That's the boss that you're willing to work hard for, and you don't care if it might be past 5 o'clock because of that, again, about that positive relationship. Helping children with emotional regulation is incredibly important as well. And this is something that, as you know, we should all be doing for our children no matter what, but especially for children who've had some kind of trauma. Teaching skills for calming their nervous system and for emotional regulation. And this is important to do when they're calm, when there's nothing going on, when everything is okay, to help them practice. You could do role play or pretend play. It's very hard to learn to calm oneself down or regulate one's emotions when we're actively triggered by a situation. And it's also important to remember that behavior is communication, to ask yourself, what is it telling you about your child? What is that child's behavior telling you? And teaching the children the words to use to identify the emotional experience so that they can move from communicating through their behavior to communicate through using their words. And, encouraging them to say, "I'm mad," acknowledging and allowing for their emotions rather than dismissing, minimizing, or trying to talk them out of how they feel. So discipline, as much as possible, needs to be relaxed, engaging, matter of fact, and instructive. The home environment and interactions ideally would involve mutual enjoyment and respect for one another and clear, calm, and firm expectations. And knowing how to regulate your own emotions is important. Showing annoyance to misbehavior will communicate or be interpreted as dislike for a child who has sensitivity to their own worthiness and value. Also, children are very good at picking up on people's emotions, even if we think we're not displaying them, and especially for kids who've grown up in an abusive environment. It was a survival strategy for them to notice and pay attention to subtle changes in their parents' facial expression or tone of voice or behavior, because those could all be warning signs that they were about to be hurt. And so it's that it's all the more important for us to kind of be in charge of our own emotions so that our emotional experiences don't inadvertently create anxiety for them. When we give consequences, I encourage parents to look for how to do that in a way that continues connection. So, for example, if a child has broken a rule or done something that you didn't want them to do, have them help out by doing a task with you. I'd like you to help me fold these kitchen towels, or doing something nice for you, versus taking something away, and especially versus isolating them in timeout. A child with attachment issues and abandonment issues, sending them away can really perpetuate that and that sense of rejection. The paradox of parenting adoptees is treating our kids like they're the same as other kids, while being sensitive and attentive to the things that we might need to do differently. It's important not to bend the rules or change expectations. I call that feeling sad for them versus feeling sorry for them. We can feel sad for our kids when they're upset about when we've said no, or upset about a consequence, and that's where that can enable us to respond with compassion. But we don't need to feel sorry for them and make it all better by bending the rule or taking the consequence away. That doesn't really help them, and it actually makes things more unpredictable for them, because then they never know if we mean what we say and we say what we mean. Be aware of potential triggers. Goodbyes. My same son that I've been talking about, my father-in-law would get so upset, but my son would never want to say goodbye to him when he would be leaving Michigan to travel back to Massachusetts. It was just too hard for my son saying goodbye. He knew he wasn't going to see his papa for months, and it was painful for him. Don't force kids to say goodbye. Know that separations are difficult, even short-term ones. Joking and teasing, it takes a certain level of trust and safety for joking and teasing to feel safe. So it's important to recognize that. And then taking things or throwing things away is going to have potentially a deeper level of meaning for our kids and could trigger loss. It's also important to know that children may try subconsciously to change the family atmosphere to match what they were accustomed to in the homes that they grew up in. This would obviously be the case for foster children. Transitional objects can help during times of separation. Is there something of yours that your child could take with them to school, so they know that they can return it to you when they get back? Honesty and authenticity by us is important as well. When I was talking about the joking and teasing, we had in our house what I called the really rule, that we could joke around and, you know, tease one another, but then if the rule was, if the kids said really, then we had to tell the truth about a particular situation. I remember one time when we were in the checkout line and the cashier joked with my son about having eyes in the back of her head. He was a really smart guy, and he knew that she didn't have eyes in the back of her head. And he said to her, really? And she said, yes, really. And he turned to me and said, Mom, she broke the really rule. So it's just a way for kids to know that that we're going to be honest with them and tell the truth, but also help them learn to tolerate some joking and some humor. And the other point here is that everything is a love test. And by that, I mean our kids, because of their loss, are going to be looking for signs that we don't love them. And they might, and often do, put us to the test about that. And so if you can recognize that that's where it's coming from and be reassuring and loving, you don't have to say, oh, you're testing my love for me right now. But to just know that that might be where it's coming from, because otherwise their behavior might seem really out of context or really out of proportion. And the other thing to know is that our children who have been traumatized, there can be so much anxiety about the possibility of something bad happening, the possibility of being hurt, the possibility of being left, that they might actually try to make it happen, because the anxiety of it is so great that they just want to get it over with. And that would be a love test too. So it's important to communicate through your actions and your words that no matter what your child is doing, that you're still right there, holding space with them and loving them, and also giving them appropriate boundaries and parameters. And then the hope being over time that they will learn to trust that, that we really are there for them in the ways that we need to be. I think that was, yeah, the last page is just some references. This is a great book. I do have it on here, but it's called Beyond Behaviors, and it talks about brain science and the nervous system, and how to get below the surface of behavior with kids to really try to understand what's going on for them emotionally and physiologically and address it at that level. So we're not just making the superficial corrections that aren't really getting at the root cause of what's going on for them.
Well, thank you, Cindy. That was awesome. Very eye-opening. I definitely learned a lot of things myself in your presentation. And if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself and state them, or you can drop them in the chat. Is there anything you'd like to add, Dr. Nye?
I will probably know that right after we leave the meeting.
Right.
There was one thing when I said about not making threats, even something like, this is again, something that maybe we can get away with biological children that is really not a good idea to do with kids. Yeah, you're at the McDonald's and they've been playing on the playscape and you are ready to go, and you've told them it's time to go, and you've packed up the things and you've got their shoes ready to put on, and they're just having a blast and they're dawdling and they're playing and they're taking their time. And it's tempting to say, all right, I'll see you later, goodbye, and act as if you're going to go without them. And that really can be damaging for a child with loss and attachment issues. So again, that might make us feel like we have leverage, but it's not worth the emotional cost to them.
Well, after this presentation, I will send out the slides to everyone, as well as a short general survey. We encourage everyone to answer just a few short questions. That helps us give feedback to the presenter, as well as enabling us to know exactly the type of content that you're looking for and that you enjoy, or even if you don't enjoy. So those are all good things to know when we're planning. If you would like to attend any other MHAM educational events, we encourage you to go out to mha-mi.com/events. And also, if you didn't know, MHAM has very low cost memberships available for everyone. So feel free to check those out. That's on the membership tab on our website as well. Dr. Cindy Nye, thank you for having us today. It's been a blessing to have you here. And I will also include Dr. Nye's email in the slides in case anyone would like to reach out to her individually for questions or comments.
Absolutely. And thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
everyone for being here. Nice to be
Yeah.
in Michigan again.
Yeah, we miss you. All right, take care, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.